Hello and welcome to this week's review on Dragon Ball Daima. This week I'm reviewing the episode titled Ocean, and we kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the positives and the headline positives, all the things I enjoyed about this particular episode. And I have to say that in this week's episode the action was far more consistent all the way through it. Majin Ku is rather lame, and the origins of everything. We find out where everything came from, and whilst it may seem that a lot of my headline positives this week are rather backhanded, I will explain my thoughts and my feelings of them. So we'll kick off by saying that I felt that the action this week was far more consistent than what we had last week, which I will admit, once more, feels like damning with faint praise, but I appreciate the consistency with the action this week. Last week was still good, but it felt as though there was a bit more of a gulf between the two major action sequences that we got. This week, it's a lot more consistent, and I have to say is that whilst I do think that the fight with Majin Ku and the Tamagami was the weaker of the two fights, potentially no pun intended, and I will discuss my greater thoughts on Majin Ku shortly, I do have to say that I did like the scale of the battle, even if there were certain elements of the animation which wasn't quite to my liking. I really did like the scale of the battle. There was a part of me that was worried early on that this would almost immediately rise up to going up to 11 stupid almost from the moment the fight began. Either with Majin Ku just absolutely annihilating this thing the moment that he appeared on the battlefield, or super-powered, laser-powered stupidity just kicking off right off the bat, but we didn't really get that, and I will admit there would have been I would have preferred to see this fight in just one nice continuous action sequence rather than it being chopped up in the way that it was. However, I do appreciate that as it ends up creating a greater sense of peril as to whether or not Majin Ku is really going to end up going the distance or not, and well, it kind of turns out he doesn't, but still we'll discuss that later on. I do like the way in which Ku fights. I like the way how he leaps and jumps around the arena of battle, trying to keep his distance all the way through it, seemingly being less of a physical fighter and being one that works more at range. Whereas the Tamagami is more of a melee fighter. I mean, he's carrying a big knockoff, oh wow, blimey, look at that sword, so it makes sense he's a little bit more up close and personal, whereas Ku is desperately trying to keep distance almost all the time, occasionally with him going in for a more daring strike, which really doesn't go anywhere during the entirety of this battle, which is just wow. I'm I'm just kind of amazed how seemingly underpowered Majin Ku is. It's the way that he fights almost sets up how the big reveal will be later on, where we realise that he is kind of cowardly, that he isn't willing to get his hands dirty, that he's fighting at a distance, he's trying to keep as much space between him and the person that he's fighting as possible. The way that he's presented, however, even if it is dished out, creates this gradual build-up, this ramp-up of skill and power, so it ends up drawing you into it all the more, that it isn't just this long, great, visceral experience that ultimately goes the way that it does. I have a feeling that had it just been one long action sequence with ending the way that it did, I think people would be more annoyed with that more than anything else, even if still I would have got a hell of a kick out of it. And it does create this greater sense of peril, as I mentioned before, as to whether or not he's going to do it, and if he does, well, then we know what comes next, and if he doesn't, well, we don't know what comes next and what would end up happening for Arinsu, but he doesn't, and he just slinks away awkwardly with Arinsu behind it. We'll talk about that shortly. It does fizzle out, and I understand that for some people that might be a bit of a, how best to put it, either a missed opportunity or something that you really find just really rather annoying, but for me, I liked it. I liked the fact that it fizzled out in the way that it did, because I just found it weirdly fun. Again, I know that some people are going to be irritated to hell and back, but for me, it works. The second fight with Goku fighting the cops was well put together. I will admit it does feel very similar to the previous fights he's had with them, with it being almost exclusively power pole based and there not being much in the way of distinct superpowers and super abilities, but I will say is that this is a fight that, once again, given the way that it's presented and put together, really makes you appreciate just the regular meat and potatoes attacks. All Goku is doing in this, for the most part, is just flying around and shooting out a few modest ki beams, few blasts of ki energy. And even though this is probably going to be the most basic kind of attack, just seeing the kind of damage that it can do is impressive because of how it's put together, and a lot of that does come down to just the sound mixing of it. I know that this is something that doesn't get praised enough, but what I will say is that the way that it's edited, it does give this greater sense of impact with it. It makes these mild and modest ki blasts seem powerful in a way in which, yeah, in this universe, in this series, this kind of power is just your everyday thing. But in other universes, this could be the major power that upsets the balance, without giving people any temptations to create new death battle ideas, but we'll end up moving on. I liked the flair and the dynamism to it. It had a dynamic about it which the other fight didn't have. A dynamic that made it feel a lot more, well, I hate to say it, but a lot more visceral. The way that it was choreographed, the way that it was put together, it gave us a greater opportunity to just enjoy this moment and the animation. Whereas the fight with Majin Buu, well, given the way it all washed out, I couldn't understand why they didn't lean too far into making it more visually spectacular, because that would, again, probably have made the ending of that a lot more disappointing. But the fight with Goku was just far easier to read, and it had a lot more going on with it. It wasn't just Goku. You also had the thing with Glorio flying their little aircraft around, and it creating something of a dogfight between them and the police officers, which I did like. It's something that we just never really saw with Dragon Ball. It just adds an extra dynamic to it. It makes the whole action sequence itself a lot more interesting for what is ultimately just a case of Goku hitting people with the sticks and then them running away scared. I was expecting a lot more with the fight with the Kraken, though, and, well, I am surprised that they've decided to skip it in canon because, oh, they're too weak to take it on, which feels very weird, bearing in mind that you'd think that compared to the Tamagami and most of the other things they've been fighting more recently, it would just be Tuesday to them, but I guess it isn't, but sure, whatever. Though, of course, the truth of the matter is that had this just been a typical episode of Dragon Ball, we pretty much would have had an entire episode dedicated around it. I mean, hell, this is an episode where effectively go to original Namek. And you remember when we're on Namek? You remember the Namek saga? Remember Bulma fighting the giant crabs for the Dragon Balls? Yeah, we probably would have had something like that had this been Z or in Dragon Ball itself, but we didn't end up getting that. So, yeah, it's fine, it's good, and this does help us pivot into the lore stuff, which we'll touch on just shortly. What we saw with Goku and Vegeta and their respective groups was fun enough for what it was. The dialogue was fun and snappy, the exchanges between these characters were well paced and at an interesting angle to them. It's light, bright stuff, and at the end of the day, it just makes it feel as though these characters are just, well, the characters that we know and love, just in simple different circumstances. It genuinely feels as though this is the Bulma that we know, this is the Goku that we know, this is the Vegeta, the Piccolo that we know. It's just that they're under different circumstances. And I appreciate that, and I really do like that. These are the characters we know. This is not some kind of Flandersized version of them, which is great as far as I'm concerned, and it looks like next week that Vegeta, at the very least, was going to have some big, cool action sequence where they're going to end up fighting the Tamagami, so I'm looking forward to that. With all that said, however, it's time to discuss Majin Buu. Once again, back once again like a renegade master, it's time to talk about Majin Buu. As I said, I thought that the fight itself was interesting. I thought it was fun. I thought it was sparky. I thought that it had a flair and an angle to it which made it interesting. It was a fight that had again, it has a greater sense of personality to it. Last week we had the fight with Vegeta and the hoodlums and the horse with boxing gloves on, and it gave us an insight as to what kind of fighter he is. And this week the fight with Majin Buu gave us an insight into the kind of fighter he is, as well as the kind of person that he is. And again, I like the fight for what it is, and I don't know if I'm going to get flack for this, but I really like the fact that at the end of the day, it looks like, and this might well change, that Majin Buu is just crap. Oh, sure, he could probably quite easily take down just about any other bad guy or major character in Dragon Ball up until this point, and probably a little bit into Super as well, but even still, with all that said and done, it's... my god, he really is just this kind of weak, wimpy little thing. When he was first created, when we first saw him, it was something that was... I thought that they were going to make him a lot, I hate to say it, but cooler. They were going to make him dark, edgier. They were going to make him this creepy, sinister threat. That he was going to be this big, bad, dark monster that was going to effortlessly destroy the Tamagami in no time with some kind of super power attack, and he doesn't. Now, to be fair, in the grand scheme of the hierarchy of the Majin Buu characters, Kid Buu was the weakest, and Kid Buu was technically the first. So, in that regard, it makes sense that the Kid Buu equivalent, that being Majin Kuu's current form, would also be the weakest. So, yeah, it makes sense totally within that regard, and unless he's playing the long game here, that he's trying to find some other way to gain greater power so he can get one over Arinsu, yeah, it just seems to be that he's rather cowardly, and I'm perfectly fine with that, and I perfectly love that idea. I was expecting some kind of big edgelord kind of character. Well, maybe not edgelord, but you get the idea, the gruff, tough, looks like you have to put my back into it kind of bad guy that you'd expect from a series like this, and that's ultimately not what he is. He's just another bunkling villain who just gives up. He realises that he can't win, so he just gives up. And there was a part of me that was expecting a trick here, that we'd get him and Arinsu on their little playing thing, and he'd say, I cannot defeat him as I am. I need to get the powerful of the magical evil eye to defeat him. Or he'd have some kind of strategy with which to power himself up so that he can defeat the Tamagami. And maybe Arinsu develops a method in the next episode that then gives him the power to unlock his next form or whatever have you. Whether or not that happens, I don't know, but I like just the whole dynamic of it. As they're flying back, you've got Arinsu bollocking him like she's some kind of disappointed mother, and then you've got Majin Kuu just there, he's trying to find another way around. Oh, he's just trying to find another way around it, or like, oh sure, I can't defeat the Tamagami, but you know, I'm really fast, so I could do some odd jobs for you. Hey, I could do the groceries really quickly, and I'm a great singer too. He's probably the first Majin of his kind to have been created in millions of years, and he just gives up and decides to volunteer to be Arinsu's gopher. I mean, for goodness sake, I love that. Again, I know there's going to be a lot of people pissed off about that fact. They're probably hoping and praying that whatever comes next, he either gets blasted into oblivion and she starts again, or he gets some kind of new super form and he becomes the bigger bad that they probably hope him to be. But I just think it's kind of fun to have him be like that. He is just kind of lame and wimpy, and he's just kind of crappy, and I really do like that. This is another Toriyama level subversion. You expect him, by the way that he's designed and is first presented, and given the lore implications of all of it, he's going to be this cool, badass character. But he isn't. He's lame and crappy. It's like when Majin Buu was first introduced to it. All you hear is the stories, the legends, and the innuendo of, oh my god, this is a demon that can never be allowed to be released because it will destroy everything. And the first time we see it, it's jumping about going, and just looking kind of lame and crappy, but in the end it turned out he was super cool and scary. Majin Kuu, less so. Again, I was expecting that he was going to be evil and kind of badass in a way that you'd expect, and at some point or another he'd end up absorbing Hibis just to take the evil eye off him, if indeed that eye that he's got with him is the evil eye, and that just give us the equivalent of Fat Buu that we have today, where he's just, instead of just being giggly and childish, this one's just kind of lazy and lethargic, which might still happen, but for the time being at least, yeah, I like it. It's a subversion that potentially sets up for something exciting later on, maybe even as soon as the next episode, whenever that may be. With all that said, however, it's time to talk about, well, everything. The origins of everything. The origins of almost all life in the Dragon Ball universe, or Dragon Ball multiverse. Because in this episode, discussed almost as casually as someone was discussing something that they just did on the football field one day in high school, the Supreme Kai just discusses how all life in the multiverse came into existence, and why. The demons did it! The demons did it! All the universes, all those that we know from Super, plus the ones that were destroyed, were created by a powerful Majin because his boss told him to. Because said boss just wanted more territory for his people to expand out into. The creator of almost all life is a Majin. Again, not all life, because there seems to be this implication that humans and Saiyans and certain other races just were created by other means, probably created just naturally, evolution and what have you, but for some of the older races, like the Namekians and some of the margin adjacent species, they came from the demon world because they are margins. So, yeah, that really answers a theory and question that I've been knocking in the back of my mind, that exactly who is the creator god of all this, because we know who the ultimate god of destruction is. It's Zeno. I know that's not what he's titled as. I know that he's the Omni King, but I get the feeling that really he's the destroyer god of the multiverse that for one reason or another defeated the creator god equivalent. But whether or not that is the case, I don't know, and we may never really know, but whatever. But, you know, what happened to the margin that created everything, we don't know, but given that it's stated that Margin only lived for about 1,000 years, it's not beyond the realms of possibility to just say that he died of old age. So, congratulations everyone, welcome to the world of Dragon Ball Super, or however Dragon Ball just full stop. God is dead. God is dead, and the angels are arseholes. And that's another thing, where the hell do the angels come into all of this? Because, as far as we're aware, they're not Margin. I know that ultimately this series itself isn't going to answer where they came into all of this, at least not for Goku and his friends' benefit. Some other characters might discuss it in the background, but it's not something that we're really going to know for the meantime, and I don't think we will do, because that then spoils Super for anyone who hasn't yet seen it. But where they are and how they came into it is a major thing I want to know, and I'm just fascinated by it. Those damned angels coming in here, making everything worse, putting a character in place of the god of everything as some kind of knockoff Bill Mooney character from the Twilight Zone, putting him in charge of everything, with him erasing universes and destroying planets left and right, just for his own vain entertainment, and not getting punished for it whatsoever. Those damned angels, where do they get off? Harumph. I can honestly see a lot of people looking at what we learnt in this week's episode and saying it's making Super non-canon, it's erasing Super. Only it bloody well isn't. It's exploring a facet of Super that Super never explored. I don't mean to be rude when I say this, but Dragon Ball Super was always more interested in destruction, more so than it ever was creation. Its introduction of God and God-adjacent characters pretty much just existed for a measuring scale. Goku and his friends are now so powerful they're fighting gods, and that was just about it. It doesn't really feel as though it was enhancing the universe as a whole, whereas here it does feel as though it's doing that. It's building the world, it's building the universe, it's giving it a greater sense of tangibility, it's giving it a greater sense of mysticism with all of this. And of course, there's also the simple fact that this could all be unreliable narrator syndrome. This just might be something that Shin has heard at some point or another. It might not be true. Who can really say? But I got a sad feeling that we're probably never going to explore this any more than Daima itself, because the next big thing that's going to come out Dragon Ball-wise is going to be Super 2. And, you know, because we really got to have that Moro arc. With all that said, however, let us get into the negatives, and we'll start off once again, regrettably echoing a negative that I had from last week's review, which is this strange fade to black that we get during the episode itself. Just as they are going into the portal warp fish thing, there's that weird fade to black for no good reason. It does feel like it's something that was just cut out just for the sake that they could add something else into the episode. Just, oh, we need an extra 3 seconds, let's cut 3 seconds from here. Oh, it's awkward now, I don't know, put a fade to black in. There's no reason for it to be there, it just feels bloody weird, and hey, maybe we'll get the full-length director's cut with those extra 3 seconds added back into it. And of course we have the issue with the lore dump itself. I have no issue with the lore itself. How it's brought into it is really clumsy. It's just this sudden lore dump, this sudden just, okay, here's the origins of the universe. It almost feels like a gag. Okay, everyone, we've had our fun and adventure. Let's get into existential territory. Let's tell you all where you really come from. Like, on the one hand, I find it weirdly entertaining, but on the other hand, yeah, it feels like a lot of this stuff should have been doled out more evenly, and I can't help but feel that if we were to have a lore dump, it should be more about the Namekians, more so than about the origins of everything, but hey-ho diddly-do, it looks like we may get more of information on the origins of the Namekians and such in a future video, or future episode, as to say. Well, that's said and done, however, let's get into the overview and just say that I thought this was a great episode for much of its runtime. I like what they're doing Majin Cube. I feel that it's ultimately going with him becoming a version of the big bad at some point in the future. How and why and what will they'll manifest as, we'll soon see. Well, that's said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for comment corner. I'm going to do this quickly because my dinner's getting cold. It's time for Big X1 who says, I like parts of this one, the action was fun, and I like the design of Majin Ku. I just hope this isn't their final form. This is because referring to last week's episode, which introduced Majin Ku for the first time. I get a feeling that this is ultimately going to go one of three ways. Way number one is that Majin Ku is going to pretty much remain the way that they are, and will either just be like this in a slightly more enhanced form, or just be a flunky for Arinsu. Option number two is that they're going to get some kind of new super form in the next couple episodes or so, and that will be effectively their Super Buu equivalent. Or option number three, he's going to merge with someone else, either Arinsu or Hybis or some other character, and just things kind of go from there. Though we will see about that. I would be surprised if this is ultimately all he's going to look like, but we'll soon see about that. Anyway, with all that said and done, however, time is really getting on, so I'll just say thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!